Hello, everyone. My name is Stanley St. Bros, and today we're going to be talking about The Outsiders, written by S.E. Hinton. Now, before I go into the summary and analysis of this novel, please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and/or comment so that the channel can continue to grow. Now, the novel The Outsiders is very interesting. I think it says a lot about how we look at people and how sometimes because the amount of money we have can determine who we hang out with, who we associate ourselves with. So it has a lot to say about people and just class systems in general, and pretty much what the role that money plays in those roles. In this novel, we meet a group by the name of the Greasers. We're pretty much kind of on their side throughout the novel. We kind of hear their story. We meet this kid by the name of Ponyboy, and his parents were killed in a car crash. And basically, in the novel, it's him, his brother Soda Pop, and another brother by the name of Derry that he lives with, and they basically have to survive together. These individuals are in the east part of town. They're by themselves. They have to survive by themselves. These three brothers, the oldest brother Derry, he has two jobs. He's working really hard to provide for Soda Pop and Pony Boy. Soda Pop, he's this kid that dropped out of school because his grades were so abysmal that he just didn't want to continue with his education. In the novel, we see Ponyboy become friends with Johnny, who's another greaser, and the greasers pretty much hang out at Derry's house, and they all hang out together, and they all kind of have to survive together because the place where they live, the place where they exist, they have to confront the socials. The social group is pretty much the rich kids. They can afford, their parents can afford cars, and they have more money. So there's this class system where the greasers kind of live on the east side, and then on the west side you have the social. And the socials, they have money, they have more independence because they have cars and they have more protection. So we basically look at their lives. Derry is kind of hard on Ponyboy because he kind of has a future. He can make it out, and he has some intelligence. So his oldest brother kind of like pushes him harder so that he can become something. Soda Pop just kind of failed out of school, and so he works at a gas station, and so there's not really that much of an upward mobility for him. That's kind of the way that his friends kind of look at him in the novel. In the novel, what we see happen is there's always confrontation between the socials and the greasers, and you know, out of nowhere you'll see socials come out of nowhere and beat up greasers, and greasers will do the same, and so they're all angry at each other. They all have this rivalry going on, and it's kind of like there's not really a reason why a group didn't go after one to start off the rivalry. They just don't like each other. They just hate each other, and they're always in competition. We see in the movie that there's this one scene where they go to the movies. The greasers are at the movies, and some socials are at the movie. And Ponyboy meets this girl by the name of Sherry, who's a soc. And they're not they don't treat each other badly, but they're not friends because they're part of different groups. This kind of seems like the Romeo and Juliet story. We have two different groups, kind of people kind of joining in the middle and becoming something, but this is not that. This is kind of like based somewhat more in reality, and more people can relate to this story. So we see interactions here and there between these two groups. Dallas is a greaser, and he's very blunt. He's very upfront. He gets in people's faces, and he gets people mad. He gets Sherry mad within the novel because he was like, flirting with her, and the way that he chose to flirt with her was not really pleasant. So she doesn't reciprocate. So the novel moves on, and we kind of see a conflict develops where Johnny, who's Pony Boy's best friend, they always hang out together. They always kind of like find peace in each other. Johnny lives a horrible life, just like the other greasers. They all pretty much live in poverty. They all live in hard labor jobs. They have to do hard labor jobs to make ends meet. Johnny kind of like he comes from a really a horrible family. His father beats him up a lot. And his mother kind of uses him as a scapegoat. So these teenagers, these kids, they come from um, horrible families, broken families, and they're just trying to survive in this world. And they kind of don't have a lot of them don't have identities for themselves, and they're just trying to figure out how to survive. And the greasers just find kind of hope in each other because they all have each other's back, and so does the show says they have each other's back on that end. Um, the next thing that happens in the novel that's quite significant is that we see there's a confrontation that happens on a park where Johnny he carries like this knife, this blade with him, and during this one instance where Bob, who's Sherry's boyfriend, he gets mad. He's angry. He's a bully. He beats up Johnny a lot in the novel, and during this confrontation, we see they were beating up Ponyboy. They're about to drown him basically. And Johnny pulls out a knife and a blade and stops them from drowning Ponyboy. And he uses it against Bobby, and Bobby dies. And they basically go out on a run. Johnny and Ponyboy they kind of like go hide in this church, and it's kind of like they have to think of now it's about murder. There's murder going on, and the cops are looking for whoever killed Bob. And now Ponyboy and Johnny they're just kind of like thinking, what are we gonna do? We just killed the person. And they're thinking to themselves, we had to do that because if Johnny didn't do that, Ponyboy would have died and they would have drowned him. So it's kind of in self defense. They were trying to protect themselves. They weren't going out to hurt Bobby, or Bobby was just an antagonist and he was pushing them to the limit, and that's what caused them to kill him. So the cops are looking for them. The cops are trying to solve this murder scene, and they're just hiding in this church. Dallas is the one that comes and finds them and brings them back. And before this happens, the church that they were in, some kids were in the church. They were smoking cigarettes, and the cigarette butts kind of make this old church catch fire. And we see Johnny goes back into the church. It's kind of like a Rambo moment. You see Johnny just running into this church, running against fire, trying to fight fire, and he rescues these kids. But a beam falls on him. He gets badly injured. They pull him out. They take him to the hospital, and he ends up dying. And he saves the kids. Everybody on the local news, they're kind of like cheering Johnny and Ponyboy because they saved these kids. But they kind of also caused the fire too. So because they were in the church and they were smoking in the church, and it's because of them the church caught fire. So nobody knows about that though. So the news just like tells everybody that they're heroes because they saved the kids from the fire. So the story goes on, and we see the death of Johnny. It really affects Ponyboy. And he's really struggling. He doesn't have good grades in school. He just lost his best friends. But the thing is, this affects the greasers a lot. And the whole thing between Bobby, a greaser killing Bobby because Johnny killed Bobby, this kind of like sets up a war between the socials and the greasers. And the greasers end up winning this war. It's pretty much just an all-out brawl. They're just fighting in the streets and fist fighting, and knives are throwing, and they're just fighting because everybody has problems. Everybody's frustrated. The greasers have to deal with this life, this miserable that life that they're living. And the socials, they have problems too. Even though that their parents have money and they have nice cars and they have nice things, they have their own problems that they're facing. And we kind of see Ponyboy and Sherry kind of talk about this in the novel. And so Johnny dies, the greasers are sad over this, and this kind of affects them. But it really affects Dallas the most. Dallas was kind of like the hardened criminal in the group. He was the individual that might have not been redeemable. And he ends up like stealing out of a store. The cops go after him, and he pulls out a gun that's not loaded, and the cops ending up shooting him, and he dies. And he kind of like wanted them to shoot him because the death of Johnny really affected him a lot. And his life was just not going in the right direction, and he didn't know what to do. So he thought the way out for him was through death. He kind of committed suicide in a way. So all of this affects Ponyboy. He survives all of this though, and the cops are not looking for him at the end of the novel because, after all, it was Johnny that killed Bob, and Bob's dead, Johnny's dead, so they can't really go after him. So he kind of goes back to school, and at the end of the novel, it's kind of revealed to us that the story we're reading, Ponyboy ends up writing the whole novel, and it's the novel that we're reading. And in the end, I mean, things get somewhat better. We see that Ponyboy is trying harder in school so that he can make it out of the poverty that he's in. And his brother's still, Derry's still working two jobs in Soda Pop. He has plans of the future to get married to his girlfriend after um, Ponyboy leaves school. So they all kind of like look forward to the future in a better way, in a better light, and they're still greasers, and they're gonna try to make the best out of life that they can. The most important thing that Ponyboy kind of learned throughout this whole issue is kind of how you can be rich, you can be poor, you can be in the middle. Wherever you are, you're still a human, and you're always going to have a problem. Problems to deal with no matter what. So let's pretty much talk about the analysis now. So this novel is very. It says a lot about human beings and just human experiences. I think that a lot of times, if you're in poverty, if you're poor, if you're homeless, you always see everybody else that has a home, that has a house, kind of like having a perfect life. You can be middle class, and you look at people who are rich, people who are wealthy, and you might say that they have great lives. I wish I could be in their lives. But sometimes, a lot of times, when you have more money, you always have, oftentimes you have more problems because the more money you have, the more you have to manage your money, the more issues and circumstances you can get in that can be detrimental. So just because someone has money, just because someone is in a higher social in a higher social class, that doesn't mean their lives are perfect. Their lives might be better off than you, but that doesn't mean they're living in heaven. Because even though Bobby had a car, he had money, he had a home, everything was, his parents were alive, everything was going well for him. That doesn't mean he had things in his life, that were bothering him, that were making his life not pleasant all of the time. Because no matter who you are, no matter what you are, life always throws these curveballs at you that you have to somehow maneuver and figure out how to get around them and deal with them. That's honestly, that's the human experience. That's human experience that we have to face. It's not always pleasant. It can be dark sometimes. It can be calming sometimes. It can be happy. It can be joyful. It can be triumphant. It can go in many different ways. The outsiders in this circumstance, if we look at the title of this novel, um, I think it says a lot about how Ponyboy felt. Ponyboy, he always felt like an outsider. He didn't know where he fit in. He wasn't a good student at school. He wasn't quite a criminal with the greasers. He wasn't rich. He didn't fit in with Sherry and Bobby. Johnny was the only person that he kind of fit in with. So it was hard for him to find an identity for himself. And I think out of all the outsiders, he was probably the one that's the most out because he just couldn't figure out his identity. He didn't know who he was. And at the end of the novel, we kind of get a somewhat of a good ending because it kind of tells us that he's trying to look for who he is. He's trying to define himself. He's trying to make a name for himself, or perhaps even get out of the hood or the projects, or he's trying to look towards a brighter future for himself. Johnny's story is just extremely sad, and I think it's the most realistic. A lot of people who come from nothing, a lot of people who come from abusive households, and they have abusive parents and they come from low income homes or broken homes. A lot of times, these people they don't make it out. No one helps them. No one can throw a hand out to them, and a lot of times they end up dying. Even though Johnny ended up dying as a hero, saving those kids, it's extremely sad that he never got to become something. He never got to live his life. He never got to um, see the world um, become better for him or his friends. And for a lot of people, being born in a impoverished situation is extremely difficult and sad, because a lot of times you're born into it, you live in it, and you die in it, and you never make it out. And it's something that you might think is rare. It's something that you might think is not significant. But for most people in the history of humankind, for most people, for the mass majority of human beings, that's the kind of life you live. You're kind of born in horrible situations, and you die in horrible situations. You might have a job that's not impressive, that's not significant, and you hate it. But for a lot of people that have lived in history, that have lived in America or any developed country, um, they might not even be lucky enough to have a simple job where they can earn money, and have a place for themselves and have somewhat of good outlook on life. A lot of people live um, their entire lives in misery and darkness, and there's never any hope. So, in many ways, you kind of have to be grateful for what you have, and don't hate others for what they have, because we're all humans. We all have to face things. And there's this poem that actually comes up in the novel, and this poem kind of tells us that everyone has. Something inside of them. Everyone has some good in them. No one's completely evil. No one's completely bad. Everyone's redeemable in their own way, because we do see a side of Bobby through Sherry that is redeemable, that is good, that shows that he was a human and not just a bully, written to just be, antagonizing Johnny and the other greasers. So there's a lot in this novel, very interesting. It gives an interesting perspective of life and a realistic perspective on life. Some people make it out, some people don't. But some people are rich, some people are poor, some people are middle class. We're all humans. We're all trying to survive. We're all in this world together. So just try to understand everyone and their lives and their place in the world. So that's my take on the novel. That's my opinion. Please remember to leave a like, subscribe, and or comment, and I'll see you guys in the next video.